would ask everyone to give a warm welcome to our speaker, Dr. Tony Reames.
All right, good evening, everyone. Really great to see you. And that was just a formality time. I had to do it, but I was excited to be able to come back and talk to some academics. And so there was no way I would say no to the invitation. But again, thank you all for being here this evening. I want to talk to you a little bit about the role I'm in, but kind of start with my past research and make a connection to this extraordinary opportunity we have in the Department of Energy and across the government to fully integrate equity and justice into our work. And so I think it's no surprise to anyone in the room that we are living in a national energy insecurity crisis. How many people know that? How many people have seen that, seen the headlines, seen what's happening across the country? Everything from affordability issues to cyber attacks and physical attacks on our energy infrastructure. Anytime a storm hits, we see thousands of people out of power, days without electricity. And again, these headlines keep coming every day, every week. Tornadoes in Mississippi, cold weather here. I just came from North Carolina where it was 80 degrees, so I was not expecting to see snow on the ground. But again, we're living in this crisis as we try to move forward in a more clean energy future. But this issue of energy insecurity can often be hidden. We see the headlines, but we could literally drive down any street in our communities and not know who's living in energy insecurity. And so I use these two pictures as a way to kind of illustrate why we need to pull back the layers of the onion to really understand this issue. And so the thermal image on the side shows a duplex. The blue is a house that is not leaking heat because they've probably participated in some energy efficiency program. But the person next door, you see all that red, their home is highly inefficient, losing a lot of energy. And so it can show you just how close these issues can be to, someone living in energy insecurity, probably spending way too much money on their utility bills, versus someone who has learned about programs and able to make their home more efficient. And so we've been collecting data at the department to really understand this issue for some time now. 2015 was really the first national study of energy insecurity in the Residential Energy Consumption Survey, which is done by the Energy Information Administration about every 4 to 5 years. Previously, these questions were only asked to households in poverty, but someone said, maybe we need to know if this issue is bigger than just those living in poverty. And people were shocked at what we found. In 2015, we found that 14% of American households were unable to pay their utility bills. 21% were foregoing basic necessities that we call heat or eat, people choosing between paying their bills or buying food. And 11% were keeping their homes at unhealthy indoor temperatures, whether too hot or too cold, because they either couldn't pay their bills or they couldn't afford to fix their HVAC equipment. And we can see that those numbers began to increase after the pandemic. We did see a slight decrease in early 2000, so right when we were at the height of the pandemic and EIA was collecting their surveys. We don't have enough information to really understand why this happened. Some people say it may be because of moratoria that utilities put in place during the pandemic. It could be people were just curtailing and cutting back. Utilities maybe weren't going after people and shutting off as much. But during the pandemic, we saw these numbers dramatically increase. 20 to 21% of people unable to pay their bills. 28 to 31% of people saying they were making these daily trade-offs between energy and other necessities. And 18 to 20% of households living in unhealthy environments. And now we're starting to see this come down a little bit. We are collecting this data weekly, the US Census and the Energy Information Administration. And so we'll be able to understand this for a long time, which I think is really great. It's really hard to get new surveys in the government. I'm sure people know that, but Congress recognized this issue and has made sure that the Census and EIA continue to collect this. So you heard a little bit in my bio. My background is in engineering. I'm a traditional civil engineer, designed railroads, stormwater pipes, water pipes. So how did I get into energy? I went back for my PhD during the Great Recession. I saw the handwriting on the wall. I was working in local government. States were like starting to lay people off. And so I was really interested in green infrastructure. And so I wrote my letter of interest to the PhD program about green infrastructure, rain gardens. I was going to do a dissertation on rain gardens. But as you all know, something happened during the recession. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act was passed by Congress, which put a lot of money into energy, thinking about clean energy and sustainability. And so I began to study, what was going to happen with this money coming from the federal government to states and to local governments. And a lot of it, again, was earmarked for energy. And so I started looking at, different reports about energy, really trying to think through the relationship between energy and race. And I found this report from 2004. So it's from the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation when we were thinking about the first time we were thinking about a carbon tax. And the executive summary starts with this sentence: where U.S. energy policy is concerned, African Americans are the proverbial canaries in the mine shaft. So basically, when you look at the relationship between energy and African Americans, the negative aspects of our energy system are felt first and worst by African Americans. And the report goes into the challenges that the community faces when it comes to our energy system. And so I knew that we needed to dig into that a little more. And so that's how I got into the space of energy justice, knowing about environmental justice research and how that highlighted pollution disparities. I knew there were disparities in energy that needed to be interrogated. And so one of those metrics, thinking through this idea of energy insecurity, is energy burden. So again, a way that we could try to quantify disparities in the energy system. And so this is a study from ACEEE that looks at energy burden across the country, looking at the difference between the average household in the country and low-income households. And so you see on the map, the purple is the median energy burden in different parts of the country. And the red is the energy burden for low-income households. In most places, it's double or triple. Low-income households are spending 2 to 3 times more of their income on energy costs. Now, energy is billed in an equitable way, right? Because everybody pays the same rate for a kilowatt, but it has a disparate impact on people when you don't have resources. And you also see higher energy burdens when it comes to race. Black households are spending 45% more of their income on energy than white households, and you can see the numbers below for other groups. And this also has implications for our public health. Just before coming to DOE, some colleagues and I did a study looking at energy burdens at the county level and looking at how it relates to different public health incidents. And so we saw that as energy burden went up in a county, you saw on average 240 more premature deaths, a 7% increase of the residents reporting that their health was fair or poor, and a 5-year decrease in average county life expectancy. So again, this is correlation, not causation, but something like this could be used as a policy proposal, right? How do we use more dollars in our healthcare system to address energy burden? My idea would be you go to the doctor for asthma, you get a prescription for an energy audit, and making your indoor environment more healthy. And we know that there are relationships between improved indoor environment and public health. So I want to take you back to the ARA era, kind of where I got my start on energy justice. It was in Kansas City, Missouri. So I was at the University of Kansas, living in Kansas City, so kind of non-traditional student, not living in Lawrence. So spent a lot of time in Lawrence and on the road back and forth between KC and Lawrence, hanging out at the bars. Too late and trying to get back to Kansas City. But because I was in KC, I was in the right space to actually study this implementation of some ARA funds. And so what's unique about Kansas City? It's in that list of hyper-segregated places, right? So that list comes out every census of the 25 top most segregated metropolitan areas. Kansas City is always in the top 25. So on the left, you see the income segregation. So the light yellow areas are low-income census tracts, and the dark brown are the high-income census tracts. So you see this concentration of low-income census tracts in the center part of the city. On the right, you see the racial segregation. Red is white population, yellow black population, blue Latinx Hispanic population. And so you can see these concentration of enclaves of African American households and Hispanic and Latinx households. So keep this in mind. So using some data from the Residential Energy Consumption Survey, we created a model to understand a metric of efficiency called the energy use intensity, so the amount of energy used divided by the square foot of your home. And what we found was higher energy use intensities, which is a home that's less efficient, track really closely to those low-income minority census tracts. And so you could see as median household income went up, the energy use intensity went down, right? So the homes became more efficient as incomes rose. In areas that had more households below poverty, that number shot up like crazy. When you had less education, older homeowners, when you had more white households, that number went down, more African American households up, more Hispanic households up, and more renter-occupied households. And so a lot of people talk about the split incentive, right? Landlords have no incentive to make homes more efficient for their renters, and so renters are at more risk of being in inefficient housing. And so with all this data, all this understanding of the challenges in Kansas City, the congressman at that time, or still as a congressman, wanted to take advantage of the stimulus. And so he brought 5 communities together, and they call themselves the Green Impact Zone. So this was a 150-block area of urban Kansas City that had been underinvested for about 50 years. And you can see some of the stats there on the side relative to the rest of the city. So we're talking about 11,000 people in this area, 86% African American, 9% white, about 6,000 homes. The majority of them were built before 1980. A lot of them were built like before the 60s. A lot of vacant land. Home ownership was really low, so less than half of the people living in the area own their homes. Median income's about half of what it was in the city, double the poverty rate, double the unemployment rate. And so this was, again, an area that had a lot of other challenges than thinking about going green, right? And so I think that's what made it kind of interesting to study this community, having a target on them to really move about in a sustainable way. And so what I studied was the implementation of the Weatherization Assistance Program, which is our longest running energy efficiency program in the federal government. And so this area got $4.5 million to weatherize 659 homes. At the end of the project, 329 homes were weatherized. So again, it set up a perfect case study to understand what worked. They almost got to half of the homes, but what didn't work and what were the challenges to actually implement this. So I published a study on the barriers to weatherization. Again, this is, never thought I would be at DOE working with the Weatherization Assistance Program, so hopefully make it better. But this was something that was really interesting to me because, this was our kind of Green New Deal program, right? Like, this is a program where if we had enough money, we could go across the country and make every home more efficient, create jobs, and improve our environment. And so I really wanted to understand what it meant to have a no to low cost efficiency program targeted to a low-income African-American community that had so many other issues, right? People talked about all the challenges they had, and so getting new windows was the last thing on their mind. So we really had to figure out, how do you make this sexy? How do you make this attractive to people when they're working 2 jobs, when they don't have daycare, when they're 75 on a fixed income? And so it was really an effort of understanding the community, recognizing the needs of the community and the opportunity and kind of bringing those things together. And so we identified 6 barriers that were either helping people participate or preventing people from participating. So there were these market barriers. People felt like they didn't have enough information about the program. I talked about split incentive. Again, more than half the people did not own their home. And so they couldn't sign up to make physical improvements to the space they live in. And how do you get landlords on board? Remember during that time, we were in the midst of a housing crisis. Landlords could care less about paying their mortgage. They just were collecting rent, not paying mortgages. People were getting foreclosed on and getting kicked out. A lot of international investors, and so it was a really crazy time. Absentee landlords, so you couldn't even find out who owned the homes. Also, there were some regulatory barriers that the government put in place. Pre-weatherization, so if you had ever participated in the program, you couldn't participate again, even if it was an earlier version of the program that just came and caulked your windows, right? So it was like if you got any weatherization dollars in the past, you couldn't do it again. That was previous weatherization, sorry. Pre-weatherization is if you have a hole in your roof, but we actually created an office to do just what you wanted us to do. And he was like, oh my Lord, that's so great. So I was super happy that I, was able to tell him that on his way retiring from Congress. And so in fiscal year 22, we proposed this new Office of Energy Justice Policy and Analysis, really to, kind of carry out that mission of integrating energy and environmental justice into the Department of Energy. And so the office has about 19 people now. By the end of summer, it'll have about 30. So again, this is a brand new office in the federal government that did not exist before March of last year, because that's when we finally got our budget from Congress. But it's growing, and I'm super excited to be able to leave behind career feds who can carry this work on, because as a political appointee, my time will end at some point, but my goal is to convert my role to a federal role and hire somebody to actually be the Deputy Director of Energy Justice in perpetuity. And so we have a policy division, an analysis division, and a projects division working on actual energy justice deployment in communities. And so how do we do Justice40? We had to figure out how we're going to track benefits and metrics, how do we define investments, and then how do we define disadvantaged communities. And so at DOE, we have 144 programs, the most out of any federal agency, that must integrate Justice40 principles into their program design. That was a big feat. I mean, we ruffled some feathers because we're asking people to do things differently, right? We're asking people to think about communities, think about justice in the delivery of fusion dollars, right? And so it's not an easy thing to do, and we recognize that, but we work with the offices to help them do this. And so I just wanted to show this, how integrated this is throughout the federal government as well as throughout the Department of Energy, a host of stakeholder engagement and kind of work groups within the department to carry this out. And then we gave our program offices 8 priorities: decrease energy burden, decrease environmental burden, we want to increase parity and clean energy adoption, increase low-cost capital access, create more enterprises, jobs, resiliency, and democracy. And so putting these policy priorities before the programs allows them to design their programs so they can identify the benefits they can deliver to disadvantaged communities. And I'll share these slides so you all can see some of the kind of example metrics that we're trying to collect. And so for the geographers in the room, you all know that place matters, right? And I think that's so important to this idea of delivering justice to communities that need it the most. So disadvantaged communities, who are they? Where are they? So how many people know it's hard to identify, well, when it's hard to define what disadvantage means for all types of programs across the federal government. So we've done that in a way that we think makes sense. So DOE has an energy-specific disadvantaged community map. The White House put out the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool map, which is for all federal agencies. And so there's like 1 or 2 metric for every agency. So there's an energy metric, a transportation metric. And then we have programs that we already send out. So we're looking at where are we concentrating in communities to actually do the type of work that we want to do. And we're tracking the dollars, right? People want to know where money is going. I don't know how many times I go to communities. I was just in Detroit last weekend. A lady I've known for years, where's the money? And I was like, oh shit. But people want to know where the money is going. And so we created a dashboard to kind of help us track that. We'll start doing some analysis on it so we can make recommendations like, oh, we're missing these places, or we're not, hitting the communities that we want to be hitting. And our office is also advancing energy justice scholarship. I'm glad that I can work with a bunch of PhDs and folks from the national lab. So we've published 4 papers, and again, our office is only a year old. We had a conference with like almost 1,000 people virtually on how do we advance energy justice, and we'll be doing that again this year. So look for the save the date. We're also going to have like an energy justice data hackathon. Anybody been to a hackathon? I've never been to one either, but everybody's super excited about it, so I am as well. But we want to bring people out to DC to really kind of build the community around this idea of energy justice. And then we have a model where we're trying to break down the silos across energy technologies and using that model to actually go to communities to help them realize their energy future. And so we can help communities identify their energy burden, help them identify how many homes they would need to make more efficient, how much solar would they need to deploy to actually bring energy burdens down. And it can print out some really cool, cool visions or visuals to help people think through that. And so we're going to try this out in a couple weeks down in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas. We're having like 3 community meetings where we're going to lay out what the model says and kind of have people talk about what that might actually look like. And so again, it's getting on the ground and trying to help people prepare for Inflation Reduction Act and infrastructure law dollars. And so I want to end with this one program that we really fought for our office to be able to lead. And so this is in the Inflation Reduction Act. It's the low-income solar tax credit. So it provides up to 20% bonus credit on top of the 30% that developers can get. So they can get almost 50% tax credit on doing solar in low-income communities. And so we're using all the data we have to help developers target, make sure we have diverse developers who are, look like the community, build solar in the community. But again, this is a way we can start to eradicate those disparities that I showed in solar adoption. So I got to thank all the people that helped me, students and the members of my team now at DOE. And a quote from my American hero, George Washington Carver. He says, "When you can do the common things of life in an uncommon way, you will command the attention of the world." And so I take that with me every day to think about, what did I do as an engineer that can be applied to what I do now? And I think we all should think that way. We have skills, knowledge that we may apply to one field, but they may work in another field or with another issue. And so think about the common things, do it in an uncommon way, and let's change the world. Thank you.
Questions? Don't be shy.